Guys, bear with me. I'm getting everybody back in. That was on my end. So these next couple hours could be fun.
I was thinking it was me. I wasn't sure, but
yeah, a couple of you in the chat going, no, but no, I think because I had to log back in. So, which is really weird because usually when it kicks me out, you guys stay put. So I'm not sure why it kicked us all out this time, but I'm trying to get everybody back in as we come back from break. So give me just a second here.
Yeah, I came back in and it was just gone. I was like, oh my God.
And you know what? We got through it. That's the good thing. This is what I know about life. I don't know what may or may not go wrong, but I do know that we will get through it. By the way, this is really good advice for your buyers and sellers. We will get through it. So give me just another minute. I'm getting, like I said, I'm making sure. Let's see. Maybe have a few more. Welcome back. Thank you. Is that it? Okay. We may have another one joining us or so. Okay. So cameras, a couple of you cameras on. I'm going to take attendance, even though I probably got a Zoom log of you all logging back in, so I know you were here. And okay, if you will turn with me, let's go back, hold your place in your book, and let's go back to page 49. We can look at the questions in the book are the same in the online learning system. The difference is the one you can treat like a real test, like sit down and pretend like it's a test. The online learning system gives you the explanations. Why is it right? Why is it wrong? So on page 49, the question we had at the beginning of class was on number 22. According to the Real Estate North Carolina Timeshare Act, all the following are true, except, and the except in this case is B, because it's not the salesperson that provides the public offering statement, it's the timeshare developer. So the timeshare developer is the one that's in control of the operation. The salesperson is just the individual. And then they need to provide that public offering statement prior to writing it up. So there's actually two things wrong in B. Prior to writing up the offer, not so much showing the unit, but writing it up. So the reason B is right is because it's wrong. These except ones are really hard for us. I get really stop and think about these except ones. Remember we talked about tagging everything as true or false. So really with these except questions, we're looking for 3 trues and 1 false. And again, the reason it's right is because it's wrong. How about that? Talk about retraining the brain. So does that help? Does that? Cool. Guys, anytime you have questions about test questions, please don't feel like you have to wait till class. We're going to start moving forward next week. So I don't want you to feel like this is the only opportunity you have to ask me questions. If you're in the throes of a test question, shoot me a text, shoot me an email. And I'll tell you guys really right now, I do really well with screenshots so I can actually see the question. I don't know if you guys have done enough of these practice questions yet to know that one word can change the meaning of everything. So if I don't see the question, if I don't see those words, then I won't be able to help you. So if you get stuck, send me a screenshot, send me a picture, say, Julie, this is where it is, this is the number, and I can help you get on stuff. I always want you guys to remember that I'm here as a resource. I'm here to help you guys. I did send it in the old chat. Let me grab it again. So here is our YouTube channel link. Click on it, copy and paste it in your browser. You can always bookmark it or subscribe to it so you have it to go back to later. And it looks like We are all back. So welcome back. Oh, comes another one. We're getting everybody back. All right, so jumping into Unit 6. Unit 6 is all about land use controls, various controls we have over how we use our land. So our roadmap, our guide, if you will, in this unit, we're going to talk about public land use controls. We're going to talk about private land use controls. In our conversation of public land use controls, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about zoning. And there's some zoning terms that we need to be familiar with. And then, as I mentioned, this is the first unit that we bring us in. So what's my role? What's my responsibility when it comes to public and private land use controls? So first, we're going to focus just on public land use controls. And the reason that they're considered public land use controls is because they're controlled and enforced by the local government. One thing that the local government gives us is the police power, the governmental right to create and adopt regulations. Their whole intention of these regulations of the police power is to protect the general welfare of their citizens. Public land use controls are enforced by the local government. If you see somebody violating a public land use control and you want to report them, call the cops. They'll get that ball rolling, go down to the city, file a complaint. One thing that each city, town, municipality, township, however it's incorporated, one thing that each individual local government has is something called a master plan. And the master plan is pretty much, where do we see ourselves in 20 years? Where do we see the growth of this city? What's the expectations? What do we want to have happen? When you guys were in high school and college, did you ever get the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I hated that question. I'm doing good to see tomorrow some days, right? Not alone 5 years from now. But this is what the city's asking themselves. Where do we see ourselves 20 years from now? What do we think our population is going to look like? And the things that happen with public land use controls is all about supporting that master plan, all about supporting those long-term goals. And one thing that local governments have is zoning. Zoning are rules on how we can use our land. Each local government has different zoning. Remember, we talked earlier about being the knowledgeable one in the market, having the market knowledge. If you're going to work the entire state of North Carolina, you probably need to be familiar with all the local governments. How many is that? I don't know. But every zoning is different. You have zoning in Winston-Salem that differs from zoning in Carnersville. It's locally controlled. Again, back in Unit 2, we talked about fee simple absolute. Fee simple absolute is the highest form of ownership. We said we can do whatever you want to with your property as long as you're in the confines of the laws. The laws, a lot of times, are zoning, regulate how you use your property and how you use your land. Violation of a zoning is enforced by the local government. Zoning cannot violate, should not violate the rights of property owners. And zoning needs to be flexible. Zoning changes sometimes to allow for growth. Unfortunately, it may be to allow or accommodate decline. Not all cities, not all areas are growing. There is a really fascinating example in your book on page 112. Page 112. In many large cities, factories and warehouses sit empty. Some cities have begun changing the zoning ordinances for such properties to permit new residential commercial development in areas once zoned strictly for heavy industrial use. Coupled with tax incentives, changes lure developers back into the cities. The resulting housing is modern, conveniently located, and affordable, all because we changed the zoning. Isn't this what's happening in downtown Winston-Salem as we speak? They're taking all those old RJR warehouses and converting them into nice condos and apartments. Have you guys had the opportunity to see some of these? Wait till you do. They're nice. And it's hard to believe that not too terribly long ago, it was an RJR tobacco warehouse. But because we could change the zoning, we could allow housing, we could allow changes. And Winston-Salem, city of Winston-Salem today does not look like it did 15, 20 years ago. The mayor of Winston-Salem was once quoted as saying that 15, 20 years ago, you could fire a cannon down 4th Street after 5 o'clock and not hit anybody. Today, it's hard to drive a car down 4th Street and not hit anybody. It's grown that much, the population, and it's all because the city allowed for changing zoning. They were flexible, they accommodated, and they allowed for these changes. So this is happening lots of places. It's good to see growth. With zoning in North Carolina, we have something called the Enabling Act. And what the Enabling Act says is that zoning is local in nature. Winston-Salem regulates Winston-Salem zoning. Charlotte regulates Charlotte zoning. Wilmington regulates Wilmington. It's local in nature. Raleigh is not going to show up and say, this is how you're going to do your zoning. There are no nationwide ordinances. There are no statewide ordinances. It's local to accommodate these master plans, these master goals for the local government. There's some general classifications with zoning: residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural. You may have mixed zoning. For example, downtown areas, you may have residential and commercial zoning to allow for restaurants and shops, maybe on the 1st floor, and then apartments or condos on the 2nd floor, 3rd floor, and so on. So it'd be mixed zoning. Several different uses are allowed. Each general classification also has sub classifications. So just because it's zoned commercial, then we need to take it a step further and say, is it zoned retail? Is it office space? What type of commercial use is allowed in there? With residential, you might have single family homes, you might have multifamily homes. How many families can live in a single family zoning? Yeah, just one. How many can live in a multifamily zoning? 2 or more. So it's how the subclass classifications So with zoning, what we're getting ready to do now, there's some zoning terms that we're getting ready to have a conversation of and make sure that we understand. If you see a test question on these zoning terms, they're going to give you a scenario, and then, you know, A, B, C, or D are going to be the different zoning terms. Which term does this scenario apply to? So we need a basic understanding of the different terms so we could apply it to the scenario. We're starting on, where are we? We are on, back Yeah, page 112. And the first zoning term that we have is a cluster zone. The best example of a cluster zoning is a cul-de-sac. By reducing the lot sizes, we can increase the open space. We can allow more homes around the cul-de-sac than we could if this were just a street, for example, without a cul-de-sac. Because we've allowed this cluster zone, we can allow for more space. Another zoning term we have is a buffer zone. A buffer zone's purpose is meant to separate two different zonings. The most common is to separate a residential zoned area from a non-residential zoned area. So I don't know how well you can see this picture here, but you see this little strip of land right here, this little strip of trees. This is our buffer zone. So up here, you got the residential area. Down here, you got something non-residential. I can't tell if this is a industrial park or a Walmart or what this is. But this strip right here is our buffer zone to help buffer between the two. That buffer zone is going to be a protected space, which means you can't show up with your chainsaw and cut those trees down without penalty. Assuming you get caught. Just don't get caught, okay? It's a protected area. Again, it's just meant to separate two different types of zonings. Another zoning term we have is an extraterritorial jurisdiction, also referred to as an ETJ. ETJs are outside of the city limits. They're not incorporated. They're not part of the city. But due to population density, they don't have their own local government to regulate their own zoning. So they're going to piggyback off of the city. They're not part of the city, so they don't have to pay taxes, city taxes, just county taxes. If the city ever wants to incorporate these ETJs, then they've annexed them in, and now they're within the city limits. Again, mostly if you have a rural area right outside the city that doesn't have the population to support a local government, then they can piggyback. And the city will regulate their zoning, ETJs. Another zoning term is something called a non-conforming use. There are two types of non-conforming use. I will talk about those in just a second. A non-conforming use is using the property in a manner not allowed by zoning. You're breaking the rules. The rules say one thing and you're using the property in a different way. And there are two types of non-conforming use. And when we think about these two types of non-conforming use, we can use a timeline because we need to ask ourselves, which came first, the use or the rule? In a legal non-conforming use, the use was in place, and then they went and changed the rule. When they change that rule, they're not going to make the property owner stop using the property the way that they are. They'll allow them to continue use because they were there first. They are grandfathered in. Let's say, for example, you have a residential area, and there in this residential area is like this random old corner gas station. When that old corner gas station was built, it was zoned to allow that gas station. And at some point they came in and they rezoned and they said it's just now residential. They're not going to make the gas station close their doors. They're going to allow them to continue operating under a legal non-conforming use. Now here's the deal. If that gas station owner sells, they're not going to let the new owner continue that gas station because it is a non-conforming use. It's just that one owner that's grandfathered in. If that owner applies to the city for permits to do major renovations to their gas station, the permits may be denied because it's a non-conforming use. We're going to talk about permits in just a bit, actually. So with the non-conforming use, the use was in place, and then they changed the rule. The use has been grandfathered in. They're not going to make you shut your doors. They're not going to allow you to sell that use, but they're not going to make that owner shut their doors. Compare that to an illegal non-conforming use, which means the rule is in place. You knew darn well you couldn't use your property this way, and you went and did it anyway. Illegal non-conforming use. Let's say you have an area zoned residential only, and you wake up one day and decide that you want to convert your garage into a hair salon and open for business. That hair salon is an illegal non-conforming use. You knew it was zoned residential only. You knew that commercial business wasn't allowed, but you went and did it anyway. If and when you're caught, it'll be enforced by the local government. Please understand, both are non-conforming. One's okay, one's not. So stop and ask yourself, which came first? Was it the use or was it the rule? Questions on non-conforming use? Another zoning term is something called a variance. With a variance, one and only one property owner is going to the zoning board and basically asking permission to break the rules. One, everybody see that? Please make note of that. That's the key to understanding a variance. One property owner goes to the zoning board and says, due to your zoning ordinance, I cannot use the property the way I intended. That one property owner is going to have to prove some kind of hardship to be granted that variance. They're going to have to prove that because of your rules, your ordinances, I'm out of luck. I have useless property. Let's say, for example, zoning in certain areas may offer a setback restriction. A setback restriction tells you how far back from the road you can build your structure. So this area, for example, may have a setback restriction of, I don't know, 20 feet. You cannot build a house closer to the road than 20 feet. And if there's a creek in the back of the property or the back area, and let's say the creek dips down into that one property owner's, it comes down and then back up like this. And if that property owner were to build 20 feet back, they'd be trying to build on the creek. That land is useless. They can't build on it with that setback. So that one property owner could go to the zoning board, state their case, prove their hardship, and if granted, they have received permission to break the rules. They've received permission to build 10 feet back instead of 20 feet back. So variance, one owner is asking permission to break the rules. A special use permit, also known as a conditional use permit. This is permission for an owner to use a property in a way as long as it's in the public interest. Think, for example, a church or a school or a hospital, a library. The whole area is zoned residential. We're granted this conditional use permit, and now we can have a church on this residential lot or hospital or school. Again, as long as it's in the public's interest.
Okay, so this has nothing to do with the block party.
The block party.
Well, because you use the end of a street.
We could, and I'm getting there. Yep, we may be able to. Like I said, this is just using the property in a special way. Churches, schools, hospitals. Again, I go back to Winston. My Winston-Salem people, if you're familiar with Ardmore, there's Baptist Hospital, there's Ardmore Baptist Church, there's Miller Street School, there's Miller Street Park, right? There's all sorts of things going in Ardmore that are for the public interest that are not residential. Possibly we have a special use permit.
But I think to Carrie's question, she's talking about a block party. That's like a parade kind of permit, special use permit, not what we're talking about, I think, are more long-term.
Correct. I would put that under spot zoning, which we'll talk about on page 115 on the next page. Another zoning term is a zoning amendment. Put zoning aside for a second. An amendment is a change. If you amend something, you change something. So a zoning amendment is a change to the zoning. We're going to talk about amendments when we get into contract law. We'll see this word again. Please write this down real big. When we get to unit 9 and 10, I'm going to ask you guys what's an amendment. And I want everybody, single one of you to go, it's a change. So with a zoning amendment, it's a change to the zoning map. When there's a zoning amendment, when there's a proposal on the table, they will notify people to, and pretty much invite them to a public hearing, allow the public to come in and voice their opinions or concerns about this possible zoning amendment. As you guys was driving around, start looking for, you don't have to go far, especially in this area. You don't have to go far to find signs notifying you of a proposed zoning amendment. They're either going to be usually white signs with red Z's or red signs with white Z's. And they're going to be on a tract of land, and they're notifying you of the upcoming public hearing. So if you live in that community, it's your opportunity to go stand in front of the public board. And again, state your opinion, state your concerns before they make that change. If you want to work that neighborhood or that community, go to the public hearing. Details, information will be on that sign. You can find it on the city's website. Please go to the city website before you show up for the meeting, though, especially post-COVID. Some have restrictions on numbers, some are still on Zoom. They're all a little bit different. So before you drive downtown, just check it out and find what it's about. So zoning amendment. Another zoning term is an overlay district. With an overlay district, we have two types of zoning, one on top of each other. They're superimposed over each other. The owners that live in these overlay districts have to abide by both zonings. I think the best example of an overlay district is one that's zoned residential and within a historic district. I'm going to talk about historic district next. When I think of this overlay district, I think of this contraction down here. Y'all remember this? If you don't, please don't tell me because it just makes me feel old. This was a projector before we had projectors. And they would put transparencies down on this screen. And then this light that was brighter than the sun would project out onto the wall and show you the image. And every once in a while, you got a kooky teacher that would take two transparencies and put them on top of each other. Did y'all ever have those teachers? That's what I think of with the overlay district. That's what we're doing. We're looking at two things superimposed. Again, the best example is residential and historic. They got to follow both zoning ordinances. The historic is a zoning term. The whole purpose of historic districts is to preserve the area, to make it keep looking that history, that historic. If you live in a historic district, any change you make to the exterior has to be approved by the historic district zoning board. You cannot make a change outside without their approval. Winston-Salem, we have Old Salem. Old Salem is in a historic district. Did y'all know people actually lived in Old Salem? People live in those homes. The whole point of Old Salem being in a historic district is to keep Old Salem looking like Old Salem. So if you want to redo your home in vinyl siding, it's going to get denied because that doesn't preserve the historic. If you ever have the opportunity to go inside one of those homes, it's like walking through time. Outside looks like Old Salem. Inside, nice, modern, up to date. They can do whatever they want to inside. To get approval to make changes for the historic district, we're looking for from the zoning board something called a certificate of appropriateness. And this is just an example. Giving you permission to make changes to the outside once they have verified the changes you want to make and that it keeps it looking like Old Salem. Most towns I know have some kind of historic district. It might even just be a street or a block. But there's usually some kind of historic district. Another zoning term is aesthetic zoning. Aesthetic zoning is for appearances. If cities impose an aesthetic zoning, they're trying to keep things pretty. They want things looking consistent, keep things looking a certain way. It's supposed to be visually appealing. You may have some commercial areas, for example, with an aesthetic zoning. They say that any commercial structure can only be brick. For example, you may have aesthetic zoning that says your signage can't be any higher than 10 feet. Maybe they don't want the golden arches blocking our big blue skies. So they put an aesthetic zoning, a restriction on how high your sign can be. It's all about appearance. It's all about keeping it looking a certain way. You guys familiar with Biltmore Village? Do you feel like you're in a little snow globe when you're in Biltmore Village? That's its point. Christmas downtown, that's its point, is to keep it looking like our Christmas snow globe. That's aesthetic zoning. McDonald's doesn't look like McDonald's in Biltmore Village, does it?
And where is that?
Asheville,
Oh, Asheville, the real Biltmore. Okay.
check it out. It's cool. Maybe wait till spring where it's a little warmer. Not unless you like the cold, then by all means. I don't like the cold. Okay, the block, what I think you might have been referring to is something referred to another zoning term as our spot zoning. Spot zoning is when we rezone a certain property, certain area to allow the neighboring properties to use it. So we rezone a certain area. Maybe, for example, we put a playground at the end of the street. Maybe we allow the block party with spot zoning. Spot zoning is legal only if it's in the public's interest. This isn't about one individual property owner. But it's rezoned to permit a different use so the neighbors can enjoy it. If a spot zoning only benefits the property owner, then it's illegal. So spot zonings are only legal if they benefit the public, if everybody has access to this playground, for example. So again, where do we start? Yeah, 112, 113, 114, and top of page 115. Just having a basic understanding of the zoning terms. Questions? Okay, so when it comes to zoning, let's talk about what this means for us. As agents in the transaction, in the real estate transaction, we're going to have a duty to disclose zoning. We're going to talk about, like, for example, the listing agent. Listing agents are going to be required to disclose the zoning before they list the property. We're going to talk about working with sellers, listing the property, all that good stuff when we get to Unit 8. We mentioned earlier, you can go to your county's GIS. That is almost always the best place to start. We can find zoning, we can find the deeds, tax bill, tax information, property records. Again, please do not look now. When you guys get your license and affiliate with your firms, your firm will kind of help you generate some checklists. So when you're getting ready for that listing, you'll know what you need to do, the research that you need to do. And one of the things that you'll want to research is the zoning so we can properly disclose it. Things can be different, whether or not they are in an urban area or a rural area. Urban areas are considered in town. Rural areas are considered outside. Zoning is going to vary from area to area. You are going to have different zoning downtown than what you are out in a rural district. So again, it's important that we understand zoning in the market, or how to find zoning so we can disclose it in the markets that we choose to work. So we got GRSs, the city's website. We got a lot of resources out there. Again, y'all don't worry about researching properties that you're getting ready to list yet. You'll get there with your firm. Remember your goals. Before you can list a home for sale, you got to get a license. So don't put your cart in front of your horse. But just know that the resources are out there to help us discover and disclose the zoning. If you're a seller's agent you always need to look up and verify the zoning before you can list a property. Our properties are listed in a system called the Multiple Listing Services, also known as the MLS. We'll talk about the MLS in Unit 8. But the MLS is where I input my listings, so it'll feed out to thousands, and I'm not kidding when I say that, thousands of websites that show my listing for sale. And zoning is one of those required fields. In other words, I can't hit submit until I have put zoning in there. Buyer's agents, for the most part, should be able to rely on the information provided by the listing agent. However, if you have reason to question it, or if your buyer has reason to question it, buyer's agents have that duty to look it up and verify it as well. When it comes to working with buyers and sellers, I tend to operate by a pretty simple philosophy. If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then it's important to me. So for example, if my buyer says, I'm going to buy this house with a garage so I can convert it into a hair salon, I, as their agent, now have a duty to verify and make sure that the zoning will allow that use. Once they express something of importance to them, it becomes my duty to make sure that they can use the property in that way. We'll talk more about next week, you guys. We start talking about working with buyers and sellers, our duties, our roles, our responsibilities. So let's look. We're starting to get Storm. Gosh, Storm, hold out for 1 more hour and 10 minutes. Right? I only need like 70 more minutes out of you. Come on, Storm. Bear with me. I know you guys are coming in. I always let you back in. So if you get kicked out, please come back. Yeah, I'm starting to get warnings thrown my way. Everybody just be safe. Bottom line, everybody be safe. As we're standing here touching computers and devices that are plugged in, everybody just be safe. All right, so let's look at an example together. This says an owner listed a vacant property or vacant building previously used as a computer repair shop with a broker. A prospective buyer asked the broker if the manufacturing company could operate in this building. Without investigating, do we see where we went wrong? Without investigating, the broker said, sure, no problem. Do I have a happy buyer? Definitely not. Buyer makes an offer, seller accepted, we go under contract. Luckily, prior to closing, the buyer discovered that the zoning was commercial, a use that was excluded from manufacturing use. As soon as that buyer said, I want to use this building for a manufacturing company, the agent now has a duty to make sure that zoning will allow that. You guys with me? Y'all don't answer questions that you don't know the answer. That without investigating things should throw up a major flag. So what could happen in this case? Well, the buyer's probably going to want to terminate the contract because they can't use it for their intention. The buyer could possibly sue the agent, take them to court and sue them, try to get some money back. The buyer could also file a complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, where they may choose to take disciplinary action against the broker's license. So if you don't know the answer, again, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. And once they share a use with me, once they tell me, this is why I want to buy, this is what I want to use the property for, we have a duty to make sure that their end use is allowed. Everybody good with that? That's why they hire me. Questions?
No, but I can say, taking this course, my realtor didn't do anything.
I hear this a lot, Carrie, and I am sorry. I am. Please remember, you guys, there's real world and there's pre-licensing world. Hopefully when you get licensed, you'll affiliate with a firm that'll offer training, offer these tools, help point you in the right direction, give you checklists that we can ask questions. I don't want you guys to wind up in real estate jail. I don't want you guys to wind up in court because you're sued by a buyer over zoning. So this is why we're here. Help build that foundation so you guys know how to work with your buyers and sellers. So zoning is one example of a public land use control. The reason it's public land use control is because it's enforced by the local government. If your neighbor opens a hair salon out of their garage and you don't like all these cars driving up and down your road to go get their hair done, your option is to call the cops, get the local government involved to get it taken care of. Another public land use control is the creation of subdivisions. Now, before you guys start writing, hang on. Y'all make my hand hurt. You guys write down everything. Before you start writing, on page 116, under subdivision regulations, the second paragraph, you can highlight it if you don't want to write it. Copied it word for word, no shame. So the definition of a subdivision is all divisions of a tract of land into 2 or more lots for the purpose of sale development, includes all division of land involving the dedication of new streets or a change in the existing streets. We're going to talk about streets when we come back from break. The creation of the subdivision, and by the way, you guys, maybe the subdivision is in a homeowners association, maybe it's not. We're going to talk about owners associations again in just a bit. But the creation of a subdivision is a process. And the developer starts with the zoning board. They have to get permission to build, to develop, and create the subdivision. And again, the zoning board's number one question is going to be, does your proposed subdivision fall in line with our master plan? Does your proposed subdivision allow us to meet our goals of where do we see ourselves in 20 years? People just cannot wake up one day and say, I'm going to create a subdivision. There's a process, and it all starts downtown with the zoning board. Real quick, some exemptions to subdivisions, just, real quick. Division of land into each parcel, 10 or more acres with no street right away. Another exemption is a division of land no more than 2 acres and no more than 3 lots with no street of right away. It's more important to me that you guys understand what a subdivision is. Use this as a side note. I have thunder. Does that mean it's going to snow in 10 days? So let's go ahead and take a break. And hopefully we don't lose each other. We'll come back in 10 and talk more about subdivisions and streets. Do we make it back this time? Good. I don't think I lost everybody. I have sound on my Zoom, so I hear you guys when you enter and I hear you when you leave. And I didn't hear anybody leave, so I don't think I lost anybody. So hopefully we can get through about 50 more minutes. All right. So I am going to take attendance. We're going to go, let's talk more about the creation of subdivisions. Again, maybe it's in an HOA, maybe it's not. We'll talk about the HOA in a second, but this is just the general creation of a subdivision. Again, the development, the subdivision has to meet, it has to comply with the city's master plan. The developer has to get permission to create the subdivision. Developers start this process long before you and I ever see the equipment show up, long before we ever start seeing the building. Again, you guys, they just don't wake up one day and say, we're going to do this. It's a process, and it all starts downtown. And one thing that town is going to require is the plat map. And thank you for telling me that you're back. Please make sure you do if I'm just now seeing you. One thing that the city is going to require is the plat map and the information about the subdivision. The developer has to have the final plat map approved before we can close on the very first lot. We got to have everything finalized and approved before the first sale. Please understand, we can go under contract with a preliminary. We can put a buyer under contract with a preliminary, but we can't allow the first buyer to close without the map being finalized. If we're under contract and there's a change to the plat map, the developer should give the buyer the option to terminate if they don't agree with that final. Does that make sense? With this, I always tend to remember that buyers have a right to know what they're buying. Could you guys agree with that statement? A buyer has the right to know what they're buying. So until we have things finalized, we don't know for sure what they're buying, and we can't hold them to a preliminary. So subdivisions kind of happen in different stages. We'll see that in just a second. But it all starts with a visit to the local government, to the zoning board, to get this process rolling. And for those developers that say, nah, I'm not going to follow the rules, I'm just going to start building my subdivision without permission, they could be fined by the city. They could have a cease and desist placed on them, have the judge tell them to stop. There's going to be consequences if they just start building without getting their subdivision approved. Over on page 117, we look very briefly at the subdivision approval process. This is obviously a very vague picture, but in a sense, there's three major steps for the developer in this approval process. The initial planning stage is going to be finding the land, making sure that it's suitable for whatever the developer wants to develop it into. The developer needs to make sure they can secure financing. We're still ways away from selling the very first lot, selling the first home. So it's going to be a while before we start making money. Does the developer have the funds to float themselves until they get that first, second, third buyer closed? The initial planning stage is when the developer is going to create their preliminary documents, their very rough sketches. Those preliminary documents are what they're going to take downtown to seek approval, what they're going to take to the zoning board and say, this is what we're proposing. This is the subdivision that I'm proposing. The second phase is the final planning stage. This is kind of finalizing the plans, finalizing everything. And then stage 3 is when you and I start seeing that equipment show up on that land to start clearing the land, subdividing it, and building those homes. Again, a lot has to happen before we drive by and say, oh, wow, that looks like they're clearing that land for a subdivision. You guys with me? There's a whole lot. This could take a developer months, maybe even years before you and I start seeing this. It's a process. And with each city or local zoning being different, you know, some are going to move faster than others. Some are going to approve different than others. One thing that developers need to consider when they're creating a new subdivision are the streets. Maybe there are existing streets that we can use. Maybe we have to create new streets. The developer is going to decide if they want the streets to be private or public. Now, please understand, when we talk about private or public streets in a subdivision, I'm not talking about whether or not you can drive down them or not. When we talk about public and private streets, we're talking about who maintains them. And if the developer wants dedicate for public streets, the hope is that they will be maintained by the North Carolina Department of Transportation, probably better known as the DOT. If the developer wants a street to be public or private, that means they're going to be maintained by the homeowners that live there. And then the developer needs to decide, how are those homeowners going to pay for it? Are we going to set up an HOA and allow them to pay monthly dues? Are we going to do a special assessment every time we get a pothole? The developer has to decide how to maintain those private streets. So here's the deal. The developer decides to create a new subdivision, and they dedicate the streets as either private or public to NCDOT. If the streets are dedicated as public, a street dedicated as public is no guarantee that DOT is going to accept responsibility. DOT is not going to accept responsibility until the subdivision is complete, until the developer has all of their big, heavy equipment out of the subdivision. DOT is going to regulate how those streets are built. DOT is going to come throughout the process and check on it and make sure that their streets are being built according to their standards. And if they're not built to their standards, then DOT is not going to accept responsibility to maintain them. So let's back up just a bit. Developer decides to build, they have to create new streets. They dedicate the streets as public, which means the hope is, fingers crossed, at the end of this, DOT will accept responsibility, but we don't know for sure yet. So we dedicate the streets as public. The developer will come in and put like one layer of concrete down, one layer of street down. So they have something that they can drive their big heavy equipment on to build these homes. Have you guys ever driven through a subdivision being built? And you'll notice when you look at the curb, there's like space. The manhole covers still look raised. That's so the builder, we don't want them to drive on mud, they'll sink, right? So we give them a layer of concrete so they have something to build their machine or their houses on. And once the development is complete and the developer gets all of their big heavy equipment and machinery out, then they come through and put the final layer of concrete down. And then DOT will determine if they can accept them or not. As a buyer's agent, if you are assisting a buyer in a subdivision with new streets, we need to tell our buyer is that they are dedicated as public, but we don't know for sure that they're going to be accepted until it's complete. It's kind of risky for the first couple buyers in a new subdivision, isn't it? Because if DOT, we get to the end and DOT says, nope, these were not built to our standards, we're not going to accept responsibility. If DOT is not going to maintain it, who's left? Now we got the homeowners maintaining it. So we need to let the buyers know. The hope is, fingers crossed, if the developer does everything according to DOT's plan, they will be public and you won't have to worry about it. But they need to know that they're not accepted yet. This is one of these things in real estate that's gotten really big, really fast. There were subdivisions built in like the 90s, maybe even early 2000s. And these people bought in subdivisions thinking that they were buying public, thinking that DOT accepted responsibility. But for whatever reason, maybe the way they were built, for whatever reason, DOT never accepted that responsibility. So now fast forward 20, 30 years, these homeowners are upset because they got potholes and they got issues with their road, and they're calling DOT, jumping up and down on their desk, and DOT's going, we never accepted responsibility. And now we got some unhappy homeowners out there because now they're the ones that have to pay for it. So it's really important that we understand, don't make promises, guys, until those are accepted. Tell your buyer, they're dedicated, we hope, but we're not going to know for sure until that last house is built and that last big piece of heavy equipment is out. In case I forget to mention to you guys, when you're looking at the online learning system this weekend, in Unit 5, I have one of those Q&A brochures from the Real Estate Commission on subdivisions and streets. So I think in your Unit 5 material, again, I like the Q&A brochures. I think it's a good opportunity, another way to expose yourself to the information and help put it together for you.
Question?
Yeah.
Does the DOT ever go in, for instance, and finish the road because the developer, I know, went bankrupt and left everybot? Do they ever come in?
I mean, I guess they could. I guess they could. I don't know what would happen in that situation. DOT, as I understand it, is more about maintaining the road than they are building the road, not unless it's dedicated as like a state highway or something. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes, guys, and Carrie, to your point, I mean, this happened 10, 15 years ago. Developers would start a project, their funds would run up, they'd have to skip out on it in the middle of the night. So now we got a half completed subdivision and obviously unfinished street. So what happens in that situation? It's really hard to tell. Could they finish it? Yeah, I honestly don't know where that would start though. You know what I'm saying? Because they're the ones out there maintaining the roads, fixing the roads. New construction it can be risky. It can be risky. Anybody buy new construction? Absolutely, there are risks involved. Anybody dealing with this street issue in their new subdivision? Look at all those hands go up. See, it's a problem. Can be a problem. You guys may want to pages 118, 119, say 117 over to 120. It's all about those subdivisions and streets. Everything italicized is like the official rule or law. Again, it's one of these things in real estate that kind of got really big, really fast because all these problems started coming up. So now there's a bigger liability on brokers to make sure that we're properly disclosing the streets. My team worked with a builder, and we still do. And we had a new subdivision, and we started building the subdivision back in 2018. And the only reason I remember this is because 2018, we had like record-breaking rain that year. I think we had like 2 hurricanes come through. It rained so much that year. Our developer was able to clear the land, But all we had was mud. I mean, think about it. You take away all those trees and grass and everything, and then you get record-breaking rain. They couldn't start building until they could put a layer of concrete down that would hold their machinery. However, DOT said the mud is too wet to build. We're not going to approve these streets if you build. Could my builder have gone and done it anyway? Well, sure, but then DOT wouldn't have accepted them because he didn't build them to their standards. I remember I looked at the group at one point and said, are you telling me that we are literally waiting on dirt to dry so that the levels according to DOT are acceptable for us to build? And the answer was, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're waiting on this mud to dry out. We were on pause. All sorts of things can happen with new construction. Be prepared for delays because anything can happen. Once it dried up enough, we were able to get that first layer of concrete down. They could bring in their equipment and start selling. I didn't think it was ever going to happen though, but it did. Also with subdivisions, we have something called the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. This is about advertising and marketing subdivisions across state lines. So before we talk about this act as it applies today, let's back up and talk about how and why we got this act back in the day. How many of you on this call, I know I'm not the only one, how many of you on this call remember life before the internet? Where you at? Remember life before we got the internet? Changed our worlds, didn't it? So back in the day before the internet, let's say we're back in the 50s or the 60s, and you got this shady salesman. And let's say they drive up to, like, I don't know, Wisconsin in the dead of winter. It's cold, everybody's cold. This shady salesman drives up to Michigan and sells lots in Florida, sunny, warm Florida. This is before the day of the internet. Could the homeowner go to Google Maps and look at their land? Could they look it up and verify it? No, we didn't have this at our fingertips back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So these people, these poor people were buying land in Florida. When the summer thaw came around, they'd pack up their family in the family car. Let's go to Florida and see our land, guys. And guess what? They get down to Florida to find out that it was swampland, that they couldn't build on, that they couldn't do anything with. That is part of the reason why we got the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. That marketing, that advertising was across state lines. So now let's forward to today where we do have the internet. Isn't all advertising across state lines? Because as soon as you put it on the internet, where does it go? That's why it's called like the World Wide Web. You guys with me? So anytime you're marketing, advertising across state lines, the property information has to be given. Again, today we're a lot more knowledgeable. We have more tools literally at our fingertips. But there are regulations out there now to help protect the people from these shady salesmen. And this is what the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act does. Another public land use control we have is building codes. Building codes are actually statewide codes. And the whole purpose of building codes is to offer builders and developers minimum construction standards. They kind of put a floor on construction. The whole point behind building codes is to offer safety. So they set these minimums and they require these builders to build with at least the minimums. Can a builder build more than the minimum? Can they go above and beyond? Of course they can. But the building codes require them to be at this certain level, help keep the safety of the people. Zoning is used to enforce building codes. And how it enforces building codes is by requiring permits. Permits are permission to build. If you want to build, or you want to do major renovations or major construction, you go downtown, you request a permit. A permit is permission to build. The city has approved it. They told you it meets their zoning. They told you you're good to go. So a permit is permission to build. A CO, also known as a certificate of occupancy, closes out a permit. A CO shows that it was built under these building codes. It satisfies these building codes. Permits were pulled, you got permission. You built properly, you met the building codes. A CO says, good job, you did good. I've always heard, I'm not gonna, check with your local zoning, but I've always heard that permits are required anytime we're messing with a property structure, plumbing, or electrical. Those are three pretty big components of a property, aren't they? The structure, the plumbing, and the electrical. Whether or not you need a permit, I can't answer that. Check with your local zoning. Some homeowners may be looking at doing major renovations. They may not know that they need a permit. Maybe they know they need a permit and they choose to ignore it and they build anyway. If you were to, for example, add a room at the back of your house, or if you were to finish your unfinished basement, maybe you're going to take your basement, finish it up, and convert it to a nice studio apartment. We've touched structural, plumbing, and electrical permits are required. But again, if you don't know that, or if you know that and you choose to ignore it, you do it anyway, what you have is unpermitted space. The problem with unpermitted space is nobody knows if it was done right. When you build with permits, they come in and inspect it throughout the process. If you have unpermitted space, I mean, guys, anybody with access to YouTube and a hammer can build a room, right? It's not that hard. So did you do it right? I don't know. Only permits can say that you did it according to these building standards. So let's say, for example, that I built this room. I didn't, but let's say that I built this room and I chose not to have it permitted. If there were faulty electrical behind this wall, we're not going to know that because I didn't have an electrician come in and inspect it before I put the sheetrock up. Now that I have the sheetrock up, the only way to know that there's faulty electrical behind here is to take my wall down. That's the unpermitted space. You will, in your career, come across unpermitted space. And when you do, we have got to disclose that that space is unpermitted. We're going to talk about measuring when we get to Unit 8, what does and does not count as square foot. And one thing we're going to learn is that I can use the square footage of an unpermitted space, but I have to disclose that that space was built or finished without permits. Here's a big reason why. Most insurance companies are not going to cover from issues with unpermitted space. So remember my faulty electrical behind this wall? If this electrical catches on fire and burns my house down, the fire marshal is going to show up and say, this fire was caused because of faulty electrical. And insurance is going to say, we're not going to touch it because you didn't have it permitted. So having those permits, making sure that it's done according to the building codes. I can still list the property, I can advertise it, but I have to disclose it's unpermitted. We're going to talk about material facts next week. We're going to talk about disclosure. It's kind of your soft introduction to those topics. We'll spend a lot more time. I had a listing appointment once, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll talk about getting yourselves ready for your listing appointments. But we got some research to do before we list the property. And I was getting ready for this listing appointment, and I went out, tax records, deed. I went out and did my checklist and did my research so I could learn about the property before I got to this listing appointment. And when I pulled up the tax records said that this home was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. I show up the house, the seller's giving me the grand tour, and lo and behold, this home is 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. And I said, well, that's interesting. Where'd this second bathroom come from? And she was very proud of herself. She said, we built it. We built the second bathroom. We took part of this kitchen and part of this bedroom and part of this closet, and we knocked out walls and we configured it and we made a bathroom. We messed with structural, electrical, and plumbing. And so my very next question was to say, did you have permits pulled when you built this bathroom? And I knew she didn't, because the tax records told me how many bathrooms. See, if we had permits pulled, the tax department would know that there's now 2. You can get space permitted after the fact. You can call the county, you can have them come out and issue that permit. I offered that to her. She didn't want to do it. I did not get that listing. The truth is, for whatever reason, I hate losing a listing. And when I lose a listing, I will stalk it because I want to know who lists it and for how much. Y'all know that house was never listed. She ended up selling it for sale by owner. And while I don't know this for sure, I have a feeling it has something to do with that unpermitted bathroom. Was I the only agent that stood there and said, why don't you pull the permits? Could I have advertised that home as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath? Yeah, I could, but I would have to disclose one of those bathrooms was unpermitted. Why didn't she want to do it after the fact? My guess is, Mary Ellie, she didn't want to spend the money. That's just a guess. I know she didn't. That's just a guess. Guys, the point is that I can still continue. I can still do my job, but the sellers need to understand if we do, and we got to ask questions. You know, if you're looking at a property and you see a room that doesn't look original, or if you see a basement that's finished, we're going to talk next week about red flags. And when we have a little red flag goes up, that prompts us to investigate. That prompts us to ask further questions, to dig a little deeper.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I had a similar situation. The taxes said the house was 4-bedroom, 1-bath.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a 5-bedroom, 2.5-bath. The person that owned the home for 40 plus years and bought it that way. And so my question is, for tax purposes, is it a requirement? So if they added this extra, whether it's permitted or unpermitted space, is it a requirement to, because taxes go up, I guess, the square footage.
I was going to say that question is kind of in the eyes of the beholder, isn't it? Don't you think the tax department wants to know about it because they could get more money on a 5-bed, 2.5-bath? So I'm going to say it depends on the local tax department. It depends on, there's a lot of it depends in there, April. But what we need to know is, like I said, when you're looking at a home, like in April's example, that doesn't match what you have on the tax records, then that puts up our little red flag and encourages us to ask some questions, to try to get to the bottom and try to investigate. Guys, I can't make anybody do anything. As badly as I want to, I can't make anybody do anything. So when I look at the seller and say, why don't you call the county and get this space permitted after the fact? Can I make them pick the phone up and call? No, it's their choice whether or not they want to do it. And in the case of mine, the for sale by owner sold to the buyer. I just hope that the new owner is aware of this, because if not, now they got to deal with it when they sell. Does this make sense? It's not just going to go away, because the county is still going to have it as a 3-bed, 1-bath. Same thing in your case, April. If it's not dealt with in the tax department, the next owner, it's going to come up, the owner after that, the owner after that, until it's resolved, until it gets fixed. Because y'all know what a good buyer's agent's going to do before they allow their buyer to buy, to go under contract? They're going to pull the tax records, and they're going to say, well, the tax department just thinks that this is a 3-bed, 1-bath. So if the little red flag doesn't go up for the listing agent, then hopefully it goes up for the buyer's agent. Again, prompting us to ask a lot of questions. Again, we got to ask the hard questions with the homeowners up front. We're getting there. We're talking about this in our upcoming weeks, but we got to ask some hard questions, because we got to do not only to protect ourselves, but also to protect our sellers and our buyers. And sometimes we got to look at total strangers and say, has this space been permitted or not? We got to ask the hard questions. We always got to look out for our little red flags.
So I have a question, because you said if we're messing with structural, electrical, and
Plumbing. That's just what I've heard.
plumbing. So I mean, you already had something in tech, like let's say in check system, you hadn't, it just stopped working and you get a new one. You also need a permit for that, even though it's like you're getting the exact same thing.
I've
Like-
always heard, what I know. I've always heard. Now, my answer to you is you may want to contact your local government, your local zoning
Okay.
board, to find out if they would require a permit. I've always heard when you're messing with structural, electrical, or plumbing, permits are required. Again, you guys, the only way, if I were to put this sheetrock up, nobody knows that there's faulty electrical back here. If I requested a permit, now the electrician's going to come in and approve it before I put my wall up, right? I can't, and each county's different. I can't tell you, but that's just what I've heard. Obviously, you're not going to be tested on, what requires a permit, structural, plumbing, or electrical. But just get with your local zoning board to find out what they may require.
So I'm asking that when they say yes, we just believe them then, because you're not going to ask to see it, right? The permit.
Sure, why not? Yeah, if they start hemming and hawing, oh yeah, sure, I had permits. Great. Can I see your CO, please? Can I see your certificate of occupancy? We're asking questions. We're trying to investigate and get to the bottom of it. There's an instructor here at the school when her and her husband decided to have a general contract. They wanted work done at their house. So they were going to have a general contractor do it. And it was enough work that they felt that permits, they were messing with structural, electrical, or plumbing. So she interviewed 3 different general contractors. And they didn't know she was a real estate agent. She wasn't doing it for a business. She was doing it for her own personal home. So she didn't have to advertise that she was an agent. But they were interviewing these 3 general contractors. And she looked at all 3 of them and said, do you pull permits? And do y'all know the one that came in with the cheapest quote said, nah, I don't mess with that. You think he got the job? There's a reason he was the cheapest, So the professionals, the general contractors, they should know better, but there's no guarantee that they will. So again, sometimes we just got to ask the hard questions. And that's what we're starting to do in this class. We're starting to build up to the things that we need to be aware. We're going to start talking about these red flags next week, and the things that prompt me to investigate further and learn more about it. Can people lie to me? Of course. Anybody remember what we document? Does anybody remember what we document? Everything. So if your seller says, yeah, sure, I had permits, I believe I would document that and follow it up just in case. Oh,
Another red flag might be people think of structure as lumber, but those new vinyl windows are structure.
Yeah, you take that window out, you got a hole in the side of the house now, don't you? Yep.
But yeah, we had to have, when we got that done, the inspectors had to come out and make sure they're in the right place.
Yep. And they're going to support that hole in the side of the house, right? Yeah. Yeah. We don't want your house to fall down on you guys. Or your buyer. So for a side-by-side comparison, building codes are construction standards. Zoning is what regulates local laws. Building codes are approved depending on the zoning. Just because you request a permit does not mean you're going to get it. It's got to comply with zoning. It's got to meet the city's plans. Still talking about public land use control, switching gears just a bit, kind of a crappy topic, I know. On-site septic systems. Seeing if y'all are paying attention. If you can't hook up to public sewer, then we need an on-site septic system. Y'all, it's got to go somewhere. So if we can't hook up to public sewer, we have on-site septic systems. Septic permits are issued and approved by the county health department. The septic permit is going to tell you the location where the septic system needs to be located. Ideally, we want it down from the house. We don't want the house down from it. And the permit will also tell us if there's certain things that could overload the system. Like, for example, some septics can't support garbage disposals. It overloads the system. And I don't know if any of you have had a septic system back up or overload, but there's absolutely nothing pleasant about it. So overloading the system, we want to make sure that we, follow the permit. The septic permit will also tell us the capacity of the septic system. And the general rule of thumb for capacity says that we consider 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. So what the permit will tell us, for example, is that the system will support a 3-bedroom house, which means the system will support 6 people living there. 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. And guys, these septic systems, this is more than just bathroom water. This is all the water that leaves the house. Dishwasher water, washer, kitchen sink, right? All the water. And that's why we don't say per bathroom, because we got to figure, we got to allow for each person in the home to have their water go somewhere. Does that make sense? So 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. Listing agents, we cannot list a property for sale without verifying the number of bedrooms in the permit, and we can only advertise the number of bedrooms as allowed in the permit. There have been many times that I've been showing property, and my buyers and I, for example, have been standing in what could be a perfectly good 4th bedroom. There's no reason we can't use this as a 4th bedroom, but the property is advertised as a 3-bedroom with an office, for example, because the septic permit only allows for 3-bedroom. That's all they can advertise. So we have a duty to verify that number of bedrooms, especially listing agents. Do not list a home for sale until you've seen that permit. And if your seller doesn't have the permit, we can call the county, have the county health department come out, inspect it, and issue a permit. This is another one of these things that's gotten really big, really fast in real estate. Years ago, people were buying what they thought was a 4-bedroom house that was on a septic. And now we know what we know. And the listing agent is showing up to help them sell their house. And they're saying, I know you bought a 4-bedroom, but I can only advertise a 3 because that's what the septic says. Do I have a happy homeowner at this point? No. So we need to make sure that we're advertising the number of bedrooms as allowed per the permit. Don't guess, don't assume. Go by what the permit tells you. If we misrepresent that information, we could be sued. We could always be sued. You can sue anybody for anything. We could also face disciplinary action from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission for misrepresenting that. So it's important. Again, if it's public sewer, makes no difference. This is only if we have an on-site septic system. With water leaving the house, you may also come across something called straight piping. This is water running from the house directly into a creek or a stream. Yeah, you can't do that. If you come across this, it's a material fact that we have to disclose. I think a more common place to see this is possibly straight piping from a washing machine, for example. Again, we're talking about all water that leaves the house. Again, if we come across this, we've got to disclose it. That's what we're going to learn next week with material facts. We always have this duty to disclose material facts. And straight piping is absolutely something that we need to disclose if we see it. If you see a pipe running from the house out to the creek, your little red flag should go up to ask some questions. What's this hooked to? Where's this water go? What's going on? Another public land use control is talking about areas that are in a flood hazard or a floodplain. Flood hazards are designated as such by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. If the property is in a flood hazard, the lender may require flood insurance. And I'm here to tell you guys, flood insurance is not cheap. So if you have a buyer that is maxed out, they're at the tippy top of their approval letter, the lender will tell them, this is how much house you can afford. This is how much monthly payment you can afford. And if they're already maxed out and at the tippy top, and you want to throw flood insurance on top of that, that may set them over their allowable limit, which means we can't complete the transaction. If they're under contract, we can't get financing. If we can't get financing, then we have to terminate. What happens when we terminate, all that good stuff. We'll get into our contract and talk about the specifics of that in Unit 10. When, why, and how a buyer may terminate. So the lender may require flood insurance if it's in a designated flood zone. And the flood zone may limit how the land is used. There may be restrictions. Again, something else we'll need to disclose. We'll talk more about that. Question comes in, and it's a really good question. Is it our responsibility to report straight piping to the county? Can we get in trouble if we don't? What I'm going to say to you is we have a duty to disclose. My job is to protect potential buyers and sellers. So whether or not you feel the need to pick up the phone, I'm not going to say that. My job is to disclose, warn potential buyers. There's straight piping here. If you buy, proceed with caution. I mean, again, I can't stop you from buying, but I can disclose that information to you. Probably see straight piping, like I said, more in rural areas. I doubt you're gonna find that, you know, downtown. But need to disclose.
Yeah, I've seen it once. So that's just why I was asking, because I wasn't sure if there was some kind of regulation for us to say something. So
Yep, thank you. And you know, guys, again, keep in mind, my job is to protect the public in this transaction, right? So is the one was it a rural area that you saw it in? Yeah, yeah. I hate to say it's common, but it's probably more common than what we realize. Look at your head shaking, yes. That just reinforces that it is more common than what I ever realized. So it's out there. Another public land use control is highway access restrictions. If DOT has plans to widen a road, maybe DOT has plans to put in a freeway or a belt loop, an entrance ramp, an exit ramp. Any kind of planned highway construction, we need to disclose that. That's a material fact that we have to disclose. Your checklist of when you're getting ready to list this house for sale or assist your buyer that has specific questions is going to include visiting DOT's website to see if there's anything on the book, see if there's anything planned. It might be that we haven't seen the construction crew yet, but the plan has been approved, right? So if you see a construction crew, you know something's going on with the highway. But if you don't see a construction crew, you don't know yet. That's where checking DOT, verifying that information. That's a material fact that we have to disclose. Do I have any Kernersville people? Vegas people? No, hang on, let me go to my other screen here. You got the 2002 pages. No. If you're familiar with Kernersville, y'all know that belt loop that they're building through Kernersville? How long have they been planning and preparing to build that dang belt loop? Y'all, I moved to the Triad in 2000 and they were talking about it then. Here we are 23 years later and now we can drive on it. If you get the opportunity to drive on it, it's nice, but they're still constructing it. A couple years ago, I listed a home in that area and the backyard like butted up to, at the time it was Business 40. Now it's 421, also known as Salem Parkway. The fact that it butted up to Business 40 wasn't the issue, whatever. You could walk out on the back deck and be like, oh yeah, there's Business 40. There was nothing to disclose there. However, we had a map from DOT that showed us that at some point in the future, it's still not there, but at some point in the future, awfully near my listing, one day will be an entrance or an exit ramp onto 421. And that's what I had to disclose. That's what I had to let all potential buyers know, that the plan is to put this exit or this entrance ramp right near the home that you're considering buying. I included a map in my advertising, the map from DOT with a star. I had a little arrow on it talking about you are here. So they could actually see their proximity from the home they were considering to that. And I drive out there every once in a while because I'm very curious about it. And I drive out there everyone, and they still haven't started yet, but they're still working on that belt loop. So maybe it's coming, maybe it's not. My job is to disclose information, let anybody with an interest know that this is something to expect, something that may happen. So DOT's website is a great place to start. Please don't look now. I got you guys for about 4 or 5 more minutes. You can look after class. Again, let your firms, as you guys are getting your training, as you guys are finding your groove, create your checklist. So when you're getting a listing, you know to go to the tax records, you know to go to DOT, you know to go to these various websites to learn as much about the property as you possibly can. The last little piece in this section, then we're going to talk about what next week looks like. The last little piece of public land use controls are dealing with wetlands. Wetlands are more common the further east you go. So as you go further east, especially down at the coast, you're going to consider wetlands. With wetlands, the groundwater is at or near the surface. They're more susceptible to flooding because the water's right there. There's a lot of regulations and controls about how our wetlands are managed to help preserve them. We want to preserve the natural beauty. We got like critters that live there that we want to make sure are protected. So these things got local controls, state controls, federal controls, heavily regulated. Claudia, I guess the answer to that is no, but we're going to talk in general more about that in a few units. So no, but is that good for now? We'll get there in a few weeks. Cool. All right, please don't go anywhere just yet. Let's talk for a second. So next week, we will finish Unit 6. We got to talk about our private land use controls. That's when we get into our HOAs and our restricted covenants. After we finish Unit 6, we're going to do Unit 20. Remember, I don't go in order of the book. I go in order of the syllabus. So please look ahead, finish Unit 6, then go to Unit 20. After Unit 20, hang on to your hats. After Unit 20, we get into Unit 7. And I need everybody to listen to what I'm about to tell you. Units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. 7, 8, 9, and 10. 7 and 8 is all about agency, creating relationships with buyers and sellers, how I can and cannot work with buyers and sellers. 9 and 10 is our contract law. It's my belief that units 7, 8, 9, and 10 is why you guys thought you were signing up for this class to begin with. How do I be an agent? How do I work with buyers and sellers? We're getting there next week. We've blown through, what, 6 units in 2 weeks? Is that how long we decided we've been together? We've blown through 6 units in 2 weeks. We're going to spend the better part of next week and possibly into the following week just on Unit 7. It's really important that you guys look ahead at Unit 7 and get ready for what's coming. We're getting ready to see a lot of red stars next week once we get into Unit 7. So everybody promise me that. Julie, I promise I'll look at Unit 7 this weekend. Hands up, you on pinky swear? Okay. So please just be prepared for what's coming. Again, we've been introducing lots of topics and ideas to you guys. So when we have conversations about agency and I babble on about like an easement, you know what that is. So we've been building up, we're getting ready for where we're heading. 7, 8, 9, and 10. Hang on to your hats. Please let me know if you guys have any questions this weekend. Let me know how I can help you. Never hesitate to reach out to me. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see everybody next Tuesday night.